Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Michelle Brown, the Chief Operating Officer of GDC Marketing and Ideation, and this is GDC Live. We are so excited to have you with us today, but also about our topic, how StrengthsFinders can help you thrive in 2021. We know recovery is on the minds of everyone. 2020 was an incredibly tough year, emotionally, physically, spiritually, economically. We know that there's no magic potion, but at GDC, we found something that really allowed us to lean in and feel a little bit more like we were thriving in 2020. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is StrengthsFinders from Gallup. And so to be able to do that, we have a couple of folks joining us. So Beth Wammack, who is partner and CEO of GDC Marketing and Ideation, is joining us. Good morning, Beth.
Thank you, Michelle. I am thrilled to be back here with Kathy Kersten. Kathy is a Gallup certified strength coach and has been coaching for over 12 years. She's coached thousands of people, individuals, worked with companies, and she actually has her own podcast, Obey Your Strengths. And at GDC, we've been using strengths for probably about 15 years. And our paths crossed at an agency retreat. We had Kathy come in and work with us. And it was really a fabulous experience. And then I had the pleasure of being on her podcast I believe it was last January. So I think it's been a year. And that's an even more amazing place to start this whole conversation today. Because boy, what a year.
What a year indeed. Kathy, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be with you.
We are too. So before we start, it's probably good to help with a nice little benchmark of what is StrengthsFinders?
Sure. The Gallup organization has done more than 50 years worth of positive psychology research. And what that has resulted in is a framework to think about human behavior. And we call that StrengthsFinder. And so it was made popular through some books. Most folks would recognize the book called StrengthsFinder 2.0. It's the best-selling book on Amazon, ladies. Can you believe it? The best-selling book in the nonfiction section. And it's a simple assessment. It takes about 35 minutes to take this assessment to recognize your innate patterns of talent, and then you get your top 5 strengths. And so there are 34 different words or 34 different themes in the StrengthsFinder framework. And we each have strengths. Everyone has strengths. And this assessment helps us identify what our individual strengths are so that we can operate with a language of understanding and of how we behave in the world.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think what's interesting too, at least for me when I first got involved with StrengthsFinders, is someone explained it of your weaknesses at some point are always going to be your weaknesses. Why not lean into your strengths? And that was the light bulb moment for me where I was like, that makes perfect sense. And then you take that test and you look at your top 5 and you're like, wow, they really nailed it. They really nailed it. So Beth, why don't you talk a little bit about, there's a lot of different tools out there. What was it about strengths that resonated with you, not only as a business leader, but personally?
Well, so I think I mentioned about 15 years was when we started looking at this, and it was because several of our clients were already using it. And so when you hear the little buzzwords, the strengths and people have them posted on their desks, I was like, what is that? Like, I want something cool like that. And, the minute I opened the book and I read it, I had been managing people for a number of years. And, it kind of gets repetitive when you have that same conversation with an employee over and over again about what their, as you mentioned, the weaknesses are. And this really kind of flipped that paradigm, and it was looking at what people are good at, understanding their strengths. And from that, I really learned that to build a team, which we already were at GDC, we're very much, like a family or team members. So we did like to play together, but to understand how to build better teams through using the strengths. And also just a little bit of self-awareness is always, I think, a good tool for any individual in any company.
No, absolutely. So with that, I think it's probably good for us to reveal our strengths. So mine are strategic, achiever, responsibility, arranger, and competition. But Beth, you have some very Interesting combination of strengths. Why don't we start there?
Well, yes, but can I just tell you that achiever, I always knew you had that. You can see Michelle's achiever. And I've
Yeah.
learned that like achievers really, you can see it. You can put those folks in the room and you're like, that person and that person achiever.
Yeah, I like I said, when I went and did my test and then looked at the results and then read a little about it, I was like, okay, yeah, this is me.
Well,
But
an achiever with competition, wow.
yeah,
Thank you.
No kidding.
yeah, and we could talk about shadow strengths at some point. Using strengths for good and not evil. So Beth, why don't you tell us a little bit about your strengths?
Yes. So my strengths are communication, activator, significance, self-assurance, and then woo. And woo is win others over. So that's a fun one.
That is a fun one. Before we do color commentary on yours, Beth, Kathy, why don't you share yours and then maybe we can talk what makes Beth's unique.
I definitely want to talk about that. But before I do, my top 5 are strategic, input, learner, belief, and maximizer. So what I hope you folks who are listening, I hope what you're noticing is all 3 of us have very different strengths. We have some overlaps, right? I think we have some overlaps, but we have very different strengths. So Michelle, you asked me what's unique about Beth's. Let me tell you, the first time I saw Beth's top 5, I was preparing for their workshop. I was preparing for the GDC retreat, and I didn't know Beth yet. So I was, coming into this completely blind. But when I looked at her top 5, and I've been doing this for about 12 years now, 14 years, something like that. I'm like, whoa, this woman's a powerhouse. A powerhouse of influence. So,
yes.
If I get some color commentary, I think that Beth likes to move. Beth likes to move things around, and she moves at a pretty fast pace, right? Would you agree with that, Michelle? Let's kind of talk about Beth.
I know, and that's not fair because Michelle's known me for a very long time. So I think we can actually see this in each other when we look at our strengths. We're like, well, that's what that was about.
So Beth and I have worked together for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what struck me about Beth's strengths is totally see the woo, is that she is warm and wants to be funny and wants to connect with people in the room and then gets down to business and has fun, but knows what she's talking about and knows what next, what happens next, what needs to happen next, and what needs to move forward. And I think it's interesting to hear the different combinations of strengths, but then be able to see that in action. Again, using it for good and not evil, right?
Yeah, correct. So far.
Exactly. So, as we look back at talking about using our strengths and really maximizing them, 2020 was a bear. And I think we're all looking for opportunities to step back and assess. And it's brought up things that we didn't realize were exposed that we want to make changes to. And then there's some other things that are tried and true. How did strengths help you, Beth, when it came to organizationally, what was happening in the world, what was happening in our workplace, how it affected people personally?
Yes. So it was interesting because, Kathy, I don't know if you remember this or not, but when I was leaving after the taping of your podcast and, we were laughing and wooing and all that, I had mentioned that, if there was a zombie apocalypse, like you would want me on your team because, the combinations of those strengths is like I'm thinking and working and I'm doing, don't give me like a calculus problem ever. But if you want to know what survival looks like, I'm like already going to carve that path out and make sure everybody is following along with me. So it was a really unusual year. And I would say if I had to think, the 2 strengths that I really felt, coming into action was activator and self-assurance. So I really wasn't trying to win any people over at all. This was a year of, everybody sheltering in place. But what I realized is that, the first thing that you need to do is just make sure that we were going to be financially stable to take care of people. And we acted really quickly on that. it was almost like, I wasn't thinking about any individuals necessarily. It was an organizational thought. And like things, like I was in a tunnel, like everything just got really, clear. Once I realized that we had what we needed in terms to, move forward, it was taking care of our clients because everything stopped. I think the world just kind of stopped and it was like, well, we can't stop. We have to keep moving. So then it was like, let's take care of our clients. Let's take care of our clients and see what we need to help them with their business. And then, which sounds awful, but true, it was the third and last thing was individually what's happening with my employees. I think I was just focused on the whole at first and not really so much that individual. And then I think we were able to migrate into, okay, well, this has happened to all of us. How's everybody doing? How are we going to move forward? But, we just have such a great team and we're seasoned, which means you're old. But, we had the experience and the expertise. We've been through a few things, but you have to make a decision and you have to feel confident about it and take action quickly in a pandemic.
So Kathy, as you hear Beth describe kind of the manifestation of her strengths, how do you see kind of alignment there? What are your thoughts when you hear that?
Well, I totally agree that she is built for the zombie apocalypse. She doesn't need one, but she can thrive in one with this top 5. So what I hear and what, if we think about what she shared with us in her story, people with self-assurance exude confidence even in midst of lots of ambiguity because they have a true north inside them. So when she said we have to take care of our customers, that's the rallying cry a corporation needs through any crisis, right? A team needs through any crisis, a rally cry of what is the most important priority at this moment, and her self-assurance got her there. Another aspect of her top 5 that aided this team very, very well through this pandemic to continue on with your success is activator, right? Because in this climate of so much detail, changing daily, activators live with a comfort of risk to experiment, get moving, learn by doing versus waiting and absorbing a lot of information and then doing. Beth, don't you feel like you yearn to make decisions to move forward?
Yeah, definitely. I like to take action, and if it's not happening quick enough, that can be, unsatisfying for me. I want to see the change being made. But what I also felt and learned through this year is that, and I think I had mentioned it before on your podcast, but like ambiguity for me is not uncomfortable. And, while I was trying to, once I shifted back internally and focused on the employees and I was trying to make sure everybody was safe and had what they needed, it surprised me how many people needed to know exactly what was going to happen. And I was like, well, I can only say this much because we're all still learning and doing that. So just understanding and appreciating the needs. And, I have communication in my strengths, but that I really did need to communicate a lot more and a lot more differently, especially in a virtual, atmosphere climate that we're all living in. But yeah, I don't love ambiguity, but it's definitely not like a pain point for me.
And Beth, don't you think too, this was an opportunity to lean into other people's strengths that could compensate for some of the things that you were experiencing as well?
Absolutely. So, my CFO, Tom, he's so analytical. So all the analytical people where maybe my brain's not going to work where I need to spend a lot of time in analyzing certain things. The analytical people who could look at all those scenarios with much more depth come back with recommendations. This is why the team is so important. It's because, given information, I'll act and make a decision on it, but I'm not going to spend all the time in the world to go through that. So it's really surrounding yourself with the best team possible.
No, that's a great point. So I think the purpose of us explaining kind of what GDC went through during this process is to give folks other tools and other touch points to be able to take this and absorb it and try it on their own. So Kathy, what would you say to someone who is really interested in I'm going to use your podcast name, but obeying your strengths and how you do that maybe personally and professionally?
Well, it does start personally, Michelle. So thinking, and Beth mentioned it at the top of our interview, that self-awareness matters. And if you are a leader within an organization, you really need to know thyself, right? I think that's something that Socrates says, but know thyself. It's really important, particularly under stress, because guess what happens to our strengths when they are under stress? They get the dial, the volume of them get turned way up. And unless we are aware and managing the way that we are negotiating the chaos around us, it'll get the better of us and our strengths quickly become weaknesses. And so it's very important to just slow down and to realize what you bring to the table. The next thing, when you think about strengths, utilizing strengths as a tool, is what you're talking about with partnership. Now, I know Beth has got a solid group of people sitting around her, yourself included, Michelle, on her leadership team to help her see the world from a variety of perspectives so that she gets the best perspective to move the company forward. But we count on her to contribute as a person, a spark plug to get us moving. And you need those counterbalances in your life, whether it's personally or professionally. But since we're in this professional type of conversation about business and entrepreneurship and running your business through a pandemic, man, it's super important that you are not in a echo chamber on your leadership team, surrounded by people who see the world the same way you do. So diversity of thought, diversity of strength is incredibly important. And I think the last thing that's really important to me is this obey your strengths concept of, stay in your lane, feed the need of your strengths. Your strengths need to be fed. Beth needs to be able to communicate. She needs to think out loud. She needs sounding partners. Beth needs to move. Her activator needs to get going. Michelle, your strategic needs to think about the big picture and where are we going to be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the line. And you need to be able to ask those questions. And so in times where perhaps we feel like we should be everything to everyone, don't fall to that temptation. Remember to, obey your own strengths, partner for those people, for what you need with other folks, and keep moving and keep your thumbprint on that pulse of your strengths to make sure they're not coming into weaknesses.
No, that sounds great. And so really understanding who you are and how you can contribute. What I appreciate about the books too, and there's a slew of resources online, including with your podcast and your site, but a slew of resources to be able to help you really hone in on what are your strengths and the manifestation of your strengths, but also, I alluded to this before, using it for good and not evil. The shadow strengths is that's that whole lane part. Is like if something happens and how do you use them? How do you get yourself back on course?
That's right. We could probably all share very personal examples of the ways our strengths have turned into shadow side or for evil. One of my number 5 strength, maximizer, is never settled. So through this pandemic, whenever I have found way too much time on my hands, I've tried to optimize things, particularly around my family. And my family's like, mom or wife, chill out. Don't optimize what's good. And I'm like, no, good could always be better. Good could always be.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with y'all that know maximizer? But every single one of our strengths could have that shadow side, Michelle.
No, yeah. Absolutely. We used to have a client, we still have a client that is a maximizer. And when you're looking at rounds of changes in creative or directional, that could always be a challenge.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Beth, how do you think about using your strengths and using your shadow strengths, like what Kathy was describing?
Well, I know, and I hate to, admit the personal stuff here, but I'll own it. No, because of the high influencing that I have in some personal relationships, I have been told I could be manipulative, and this is from my children, and maybe from one ex-husband to date. But when you have all that influence working together, it can feel like you're being manipulated. So I am aware of that. I know that. I don't intend to make anybody feel that way. So that's when I really have to kind of step back and realize I'm not getting the outcome that I'm looking for. And really honestly have to put some space on it usually.
Yeah, yeah. Personally, for me, probably some of the best advice I got was from an individual who told me that I control the stress in the household.
Ooh.
And boy, did that resonate with me because that's where my strengths are suddenly bleeding into where they shouldn't go. And it really does. It takes practice to be able to kind of step back, stop, acknowledge what you're doing, step back, and then try and think through what are you going to do next time you feel yourself going that way. So it's challenging, but I have found strengths to be really, really helpful, not only in how I see myself, but how we see others. Kathy, do you want to talk a little bit about how you assemble teams and things along those lines based on strengths, or how you could even think about that?
Absolutely. So what we're just describing right now is feedback, right? We've all gotten feedback regarding our strengths being turned up too high or in that shadow strength, and that applies on teams as well. But as you notice, we all kind of owned up to our shadow side or the weakness within our strength in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. I mean, we're exuding vulnerability in this moment, but we don't feel shame around it. We feel like, man, it is because my strength got turned up too high. I realize most of the time it's in the productive mode, or hopefully most of the time. But sometimes it tips over into weakness. And that is a gift to give to teams. When a team can sit together and understand what each person brings to the table and their strengths, top 5, their strength suit, and then understanding, man, what does that look like when it bubbles up and over? So for instance, if I was on the GDC team, you might hear me say, whoa, Beth, your activator is like rolling me over right now. My strategic is wondering, how the heck will we do what you just said in 3 months? Because I'm thinking it's going to take 8 weeks, or I'm sorry, 8 months. And she's going to say, okay, I'm going to scale it back, not necessarily change her mind, but like, Kathy needs more detail. Kathy needs more of my communication strength. And we can use this language to help us get what we need to contribute at a higher level. Otherwise, without a good positive way of describing miscommunications or different work styles and different pacing, we just look at it and we go, Kathy's too detailed. She's too in the weeds. And Beth is too ready, fire, aim. And, Michelle is too driven because, my gosh, she's an Energizer bunny, and we just use these 2 words, right? Or other terrible nicknames in the workplace, and it's not productive and it gets us into gridlock. So I'm kind of staying within the conflict scenario here, but I think if we're to flip it to the positive side, it's also realizing, man, we don't expect Beth to be analytical, and she's hired. I don't know if you've hired for it per se, but you have it in your CFO, right? You have it in people around you, that you don't have to be that, and it's so freeing to say, not my strength, that's your strength, and that's why we hired you.
No, that's a great point. Beth, what's been your experience around this?
Just kind of bridging off of what Kathy just said. So I do feel sometimes with the activator that if things aren't getting done quick enough, it's a lot of times people don't know what all those steps are, those natural steps. Like, so in a process or something, like I might see something that needs to be fixed, but Michelle, might be why you've entered the organization now, because looking at your strengths, we make a really good team. And it is having someone who can take it and break it down for people who do need all those extra steps, where I might get impatient, and that's where you will see the shadow strength come out, and the negative part of it. And, Kathy, it really was interesting because, pandemic hit, and, I had just evolved was going into the CEO role, trying to do both roles. And I was like, not working. Brought Michelle back into the organization because she didn't even miss a step, was able to just jump right in. And then and we knew what our strengths were, but in reviewing them in terms of, executing, between Michelle, myself, Frank, and Carrie, we're just so balance each other out. It really is interesting to see that happen. And I feel like we're just, it's working. And so that's when I see that, and I want to take that and put that into other teams in the organization, because it feels very fulfilling to have that kind of teamwork. We don't agree on everything. No, it's not about being in harmony or in agreement, but rather that I can take it to here, you're going to take and put this here, and just it's a better implementation for the entire agency. So,
yeah, and if you think about it too, I don't care who you are or what your strengths are. When you trust the people around you to follow through on things, that just makes an amazing workplace. And so I think strengths for us in this organization and other organizations I've been a part of, you really get to know your teammates well enough, and you're seeing them perform in ways that enhance your strengths or round out strengths that you don't have, that really make it truly fulfilling. So at any rate, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate us all being able to get in the same place. Granted, it's virtual, and that's something else to potentially look forward to in 2021, is all being in the same place. Exactly, fingers crossed. So with that, this is StrengthsFinders and Gallup is something that you could start on your own. You could go to Amazon, like apparently millions of people have, or any bookstore, and access the book, get the code, take the test online, get your top 5 strengths. If you want, you could get all 35 in what order, which is also kind of a fun mirror to look into. But it's also super helpful to have a coach like Kathy, who can come in as a third party, as someone who's seeped in strengths, to be able to help guide you through this journey. And we appreciate Kathy a ton for being able to not only help us in ways, but to share her time today. So if you want to learn more about strengths and how it can be beneficial for your business, we strongly recommend Kathy. Learn more about Kathy and contact her at her website. So it's kathykersten.com, the information on your screen. If you want to hear more about strengths, please listen to her podcast, Obey Your Strengths. It's found on Apple, Google, and you can also access it through her website. But we really appreciate you, Kathy. Thank you again for coming and being so kind with your time and insight and feedback.
Hey, GDC team, it's no surprise that y'all are still winning. There's no surprise that you're doing great things. I am a fan and I'm cheering on your team. So keep going, GDC.
Thank you, Kathy.
Very much. And if you're interested in understanding more about GDC, maybe how we've leveraged strengths or what our journeys look like, or how we're using those to be able to serve our clients, please reach out to Beth Wammack at gdc-co.com. You could also see our website at gdc-co.com. So thank you all again for being here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.